good selling is always some combination of art and science. When you think about upfront contracts, what that really is it's the science to sales cycle. It's the science to no pressure for the seller as they progress through a sales cycle. It's knowing every step of the way what you've done, and then more importantly, what are you going to do next? And not just for the seller to know it, but a good upfront contract means that both parties, the prospect and the seller, know it. They've mutually agreed to it. And if we're using that science and we've developed that the right way, we get comfortably to a no or we get comfortably to a yes, but it'll happen faster and it'll happen with both parties feeling comfortably in control.
So we start talking about upfront contracts. Let's talk a little bit about what that means and how that gets into play.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe a good place to start, if there's any legal professionals listening, the upfront contract is not a written 10-page, 100-page contract. It's just a verbal agreement between two parties as they interact and engage with each other. And for the purposes of the upfront contract in our conversations, we'll say that interaction is a sales conversation. So when you break it down, maybe a good place to start is what is the problem or what is the challenge that an upfront contract is really designed to solve for? And there's a progression I think every seller goes through as they kind of learn, sometimes through struggles and through problems, and then they've got to kind of figure out how to solve for these struggles and problems, and they learn to develop hopefully some versions of an upfront contract, although they might be missing some finer points. We'll talk that through today. But if we go back to here's the problem that it's designed to solve. So every seller, more or less, when they begin their career in sales, they kind of suffer from this environment. They'll meet with a potential client and they have a nice conversation. We like to call it sales broing because it kind of ends like this. It's like I meet you somewhere, Anthony, and we chit chat and I go, hey, we should talk again. And you're like, yeah, we should totally talk again. And I go, great. And you go, great. And then we leave.
And then all of a sudden it's like, what?
Yeah.
We talked to them and they were for sure they're going to call me back, and I get off the phone. I'm like, oh my God, I just had a great conversation with Bob, and Bob's ready to buy it. It's great, and we're all excited. I walk away feeling like I'm ready for this deal is going to happen.
Yep. And there's nothing there, right? So that's kind of like the place everyone starts. They get to a level of frustration, and then they start adding layers. Hopefully naturally, hopefully at some point, maybe by design, if they learn some of these things, but. They'll kind of move through this progression. I'll find. So then they get a little more confidence. They say, hey, it was great to talk to you, Anthony. Can we catch up again next week? Right.
There you go. Right. And Bob's like, yeah. Next week. Great.
Yep. So now I know at least it's next week, right? So I'm feeling better about that. But I don't know if it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Sometime. When do I call? If I call Monday, and then I'm on the other side going, if I call it Monday, I'm going to sound too eager. If I call it Tuesday, but maybe I don't want to bother him. But should I call and leave a message and say, hey, do you want? There's all that stuff that happens over in my head as a salesperson.
Absolutely. And, even worse maybe is for the weekend leading up to that week where there was no defined day, you're thinking about it all weekend. You're supposed to be with your kids, your family, your spouse, right? And so it builds that head trash, right? A lot of pressure. And so then maybe the progression moves to, hey, I get comfortable picking like an actual day. So then I say, can I call you on Tuesday next week? Right.
Yeah.
And you go, sure. But again, I didn't specify, is it morning? Is it afternoon? Is it, end of business? Right. So there's still this gap there. And then maybe the progression leads to, we pick an actual time, right? So, I get to the point where I go, Anthony, can I call you on Tuesday at noon? Right.
Yeah, that's right.
But noon is maybe 12, it's maybe 11, it's maybe 1. It's not, fully defined there.
That's right.
Yeah. So then we got this challenge, right? I'm sitting there patiently waiting for noon to show up. I haven't specified noon. I call, you don't know what noon is. You don't answer. And we're playing phone tag. And then maybe we go to another progression and we add another layer to it. So we get really, really granular with like dates and times. And so it's, Anthony, can we talk at 11 o'clock on Tuesday? Would you open to that?
Yeah. And that's like my old sales training. Like, all right, Tuesday or Thursday. Yep. Right. And they go, Tuesday. Great. 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock. Right. And I would get that like 1 o'clock. Right. Great. So Thursday, we'll do Thursday at 1 o'clock. Right. I've got Thursday at 1 o'clock.
Absolutely. And so now we feel like we've made a lot of progress, right? And certainly, the seller has. That's a vast improvement on where they started when they finally get to a date and an actual time. But then there's these other challenges that most people never really learn. And that's where upfront contracts start to come into play. So let's say we finally get to the point where we've got dates and times. We've gotten good at that, but we're missing some key stuff. And here's what might happen. You actually have that conversation on the day, on the time it was scheduled. But as you start to go through that meeting, you realize you and your prospect are on two completely different pages.
That's right.
Right?
Absolutely.
Right. Anthony, their expectations for what was supposed to take place wildly disparate from what the seller's expectations were. And look, it just ends to an awkward conversation, right? Both parties we talked about okay, not okay last time we were together,
That's
right?
right.
This is
That's
where
right.
people go from, okay, because we agreed to meet, to immediately some version of not okay because we're not on the same page here,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so there we start adding some layers, and we'll talk about what the upfront contract looks like as we go through this conversation. But I want to kind of lay out maybe this framework, help people understand what it's going to try to solve and fix.
Yep.
So we've got maybe misaligned agendas. We need to align those. And then, what really ends up happening is the biggest problem that I think upfront contracts are designed to solve for. And so if the audience recognizes this, or, Anthony, if you've got any shares here, I'd love to hear them.
Yeah.
I think sometimes sellers' frustration, the biggest frustration they have to deal with is they're trying to close at the end of a meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that close may be for another meeting. It may be to get other people involved. It may be actually when it's the point to say, hey, should we work together or not? And they're trying to close at the end of a meeting, and they're getting pushback there. Right. And the reason is they did not prepare someone for a decision they were expecting them to make. Right.
That's right. That's right. Like not knowing that that's what we're going to do in this next meeting. It's really start to get there. Right. I when I, as a salesperson, I'm over on the other side thinking I'm going to close at that meeting. I'm going to get all of Bob's time or whoever's time it is,
Yep.
Bob or Betty's time. I've got their time and they want to talk to me, and I'm going to go there and I'm going to tell them everything about what I need to do. Now, there on the other side, there's a whole nother way of thinking, right? They were just trying to get me off the phone as fast as they could.
And so
right.
we're on these separate pages, right? And we're going to create this thing that becomes an objection. It's a problem. We talked about the buyer seller dance. Even if you open the conversation well, you're going to finish in the buyer seller dance, right? It's some
That's
version of that, lying about what a prospect is prepared to do next, or misleading about what they're prepared to do next. And so, there's all these problems that get created without an upfront contract. I think it's important to probably just acknowledge the elephant in the room. The hardest thing about upfront contracts, when I lay out the steps, everyone will recognize they're simple. There's 5 core elements to it. That's simple. It's not easy though, right? It's not easy. It's kind of counterintuitive. It's not natural for most people to learn to do it.
No.
Right. It's something that has to be kind of trained and adopted and learned and practiced before it becomes fluid and natural. I've gone on a ton of ride-alongs, Anthony. I have yet to see someone demonstrate an upfront contract without having learned it and prepared for it. They'll get certain elements right, but we get the whole thing down, which is where it really makes a difference. Often they just need to practice that.
And that's what I want people to hear when you're getting this. Like, honest, look, if you're not getting this, that no one's natural. Whoever you think is doing this great, they're baloney. They practice. Nobody gets upfront contracts right in the beginning, right? The only way to get this is you have got to role play and practice and relentless and practice. Because the problem is in the middle of what you're doing, your brain's going 1,000 miles an hour, and you have to be ready for the process, right? You got to prepare yourself to go, look, let's not get the cart ahead of the horse here. Let's make sure that we understand that in order for that next meeting to be valuable, right? I don't waste all this time and all my mind energy and all that, what you call it, mind clutter, right?
Yep.
For the next week thinking about this, if I'm not setting up the next meeting to be of value, right? I mean, if I rush out of this right now, and for sure that's happened. You guys remember you did it when you were dating. Oh, I got this girl's number. Right. And you got this girl's number and you thought, oh my God, I'm going to date with her. She's like, I just wanted to get you out of I just wanted a free drink and get out of here. Right.
Yeah.
I had no desire to ever talk to you again. I just wanted the free drink. Right. And you made me give your number. And then, like a week later, you're calling and it's the same thing happening at a sales call. It's like this nonsense we do that we think, and that's why sales training is so important, to understand the model that we're going to go through with Erik's team. Right. He's about to show you that, look, in that when they're getting off the phone with you, right? And believe me, that first time they talk to him and you got that prospect, you got a great opportunity. You got to just remember to stay in the moment. Think about the process. You're really trying to set up the next call. Look, you're going to let them off the phone, right? They're busy. They're not sure. You want to get that buyer's dance, right?
Yep.
But you want to make sure that the next agreement, right, they can see it. And now we want to make sure that we start to set up for that, right? So it's either in the call that we're having. And Erik, if I don't get all that, if I don't get the upfront contract during the call, right?
Yep.
If I can't get there, can I do it between the calls? Can I send them an agenda? How can I make it if I don't get all the parts and pieces right during my last agreement before I get to the other one? How do I do that?
Yeah, Anthony, I love that question. So, it's important for me to probably share first. I had a coach for, the better half of 5, 6 years learning how to do this. Everyone needs a coach, right?
That's right.
And I have other coaches today, but, when I was really learning how to do this process that we're talking about here, my coach would ask me, because I'd enthusiastically say, hey, I got a sales meeting next week, right? And I was pretty proud of that. And he'd go, hey, great, Eric, tell me about your upfront contract. And I go, well, I think, and he just kind of stopped me there, because if I said I think, he knew intuitively I did not complete an upfront contract, right? I either know or I don't know, because I did or I did not do. And so he was always kind of fun. He would say, well, you could do one of two things. You could show up to the meeting, try to establish one and hope it works out. Or maybe you want to reach out to them before the meeting and confirm that what your upfront contract is designed to be is one they're willing to agree to, right? And I knew what that meant, right? The second option was the right option. So if you don't get everything done, or you don't get it all clear, and you realize that after you've wound the conversation down, absolutely reach out to them in between. And we like to say, just fall on your sword. So I'd say, hey, Anthony, I just wanted to, kind of confirm some things. We got a meeting set up for next week. I'm not sure I got a chance to go through it last time we spoke. Can I share with you what I was anticipating or expecting? Make sure we're both on the same page. And, you're always open to it. We go through it. Most of the time, what I would find is that you were comfortable, I was comfortable, and now we had clarity. But every now and then I would find out that we were on totally separate pages. So we could either agree to not have the meeting because it was going to be weird and bad anyway, right?
That's right.
Or we could at least try to figure out how to, get back on the same page and figure out how to have that meeting. So, if you don't do it in the moment, that's fine. Don't worry, but do it before the next moment, right?
And I've even had those calls, those follow-up calls right there.
Yeah.
I've had them go, now that I think about it, look, I'd like to get my boss into this. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And well-defined, like, look, if we're going to talk about this, you're exactly what I want to talk about. We've been dying to find a company like you to work with,
Yep.
but I think my boss should be in this meeting. Right.
Yeah.
It'd be great to have him, and maybe our purchasing people would like to be in here. And let me see if he's available for the time I set with you. Oh, no,
Absolutely.
he's not. Maybe get a call back or text back and say, hey, he's not available on Thursday at 2:00 or whatever, or 11 or 1:00 when we agreed on, but he's available on Friday. And by the way, he's also got his boss coming in the meeting, and we're going to give you, you're not going to have a lot of time, but you'll be able to, give you, like, all of a sudden that clarity creates a much better opportunity, right? The buyer is seeing it, right? The buyer sees it. You were much more articulate about it. And then they start to formulate, how I'm going to use you, right? How I'm going to use this company to support, make my life, ultimately, all they're looking for is to make their life easier, right?
Yep. Absolutely. And, that's a great point there. Good upfront contracts help to bring, otherwise what would have been hidden or uninvolved decision makers into early meetings, because they know what's to be expected. And if that person you're talking to can't fulfill those obligations, they're more likely to suggest who needs to be there, how we get them involved, right? And we're bringing all of these sales cycle breaks, together to shorten them down. Good upfront contracts, I've observed, they'll eliminate 2 or 3 steps in the sales process just by setting good ones, right? So you might go from having a 60-day sales cycle down to 30 days just simply by setting good upfront contracts. The right people show up, the right agreements are made, the right decisions are made each way along the way, and it moves faster, right, Anthony?
That's right. Every time we do that, those people are in the right, we get the right setup for the conversation.
Yep.
Then I'm ready to walk into it, and I can really walk into that next meeting. So let's keep going on before we get to the meeting. So making sure the meeting, the upfront contract is set, and we're ready. And really, so again, the whole purpose of the upfront contract is to set what we're going to do for the next meeting. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, absolutely. If you kind of picture them, when they're designed well, you want them to be like bookends. So they should begin the interaction, because you're going to have to set one in the beginning just to see if both parties are on the same page, right? And that might be on that phone call. We're going to set aside 10 or 15 minutes to have a conversation, see if there's something we want to pursue beyond here, right? And then we set an upfront contract at the end of the phone call, which is in preparation for whatever that next meeting is. That one starts with an upfront contract to fulfill that meeting, and it ends with a new upfront contract to fulfill the next meeting. So there are always these kind of bookends to a meeting. They should start it, and then they should complete it and start the next one. And when we don't have them, just like with bookends, you take a bookend away, what happens to the books? They fall over, right? And that's kind of what happens to the sales process. Something else to think about too for the sales leaders out there And Anthony, this one might remind you of a time in life, right, where it was frustrating. I remember this, getting the culture of upfront contracts through my company and making sure we were doing it well. We're going through a pipeline review, and you look at a new opportunity on the board and you say, hey, this is great. You got that up there. So what's going on here? Which is a bad question, by the way, but that's a question I think sales leaders ask sometimes. And you get this story, right? Here's what we did. Here's what happened, right?
Right.
And there's no clarity on what's happening next, right? And you know that because you say, well, what did you guys agree to do next? And they said, well, we're going to follow up next week. Well, that means there's no upfront contract, right? I'm going to touch base with them next week. Well, there's no upfront contract. I think this is what we're doing. There's no upfront contract. And so, this pipeline just starts to age, right? And back in the day, I remember tracking it on a dry erase board, right? And we like to talk about this, that a dry erase board, you used to be able to clear it up if things were moving quick, but the ones that stayed on there long enough, they became permanent ink. Right, you needed Windex to take them off.
That's right. Right. And they were on there, and you had some glimmer of hope in there, but there was just there was no, and more frustrating. It goes back to that thing you talked about, that brain clutter, right? Yeah. Those are the ones where my judgment is, and my sales team goes through this every week. They come to present to me that whole sales list that they're working on and the things they're working on, but there's no clarity about what's happening. And for me, I then want to interrupt the sales cycle. From our side, right? Because I think we've gotten patternistic about calling no return, and I'm like, stop. Look, at this point, guys, you got to elevate the call to you. First of all, what you're doing? You're stuck there. You're stuck, and I need to break that thing. And I just say, look, this is time to either bring a VP in, or bring in a bunch of VPs, or make a special meeting, or really show up at their front door for a meeting and really create an on-site. Because once we're in front of them, right, once our team's there, and they can really start to see it, because a lot of times they want what we have.
Yeah.
But the trouble of going from getting us on board to not getting us on board just seems overwhelming. Like I always imagine that the salesperson that we're talking to, or the buyer that we're talking to, their day is going like my day does. It's 1,000 miles an hour. They've got 100 things going on at any given time. Someone's at their front door, in their office, or on their door, or on their phone the entire time. And you're trying to close them. And they're like, dude, I cannot take one more thing at this now. Even though I want you, right? You're going to make my life easier. I can't do it because I just got too much going on. And my judgment is that if I could just stop and get in front of them and then show them how easy the process is going to be to get on board, or once they get time with me, right, get time with our group, and they can feel the energy of our group and what we're going to do for them ongoing, that process, they're dying to get it. They'll pull the right people in, and we'll make that sales friction a lot easier, right? We know how to get from off board to on board with a team. Really, we've created a frictionless process to onboarding. So I just need to we just need to get that in front of it. If one of our salespeople is stuck in the call, no contract created, no upfront contract, they're stuck. And by the way, it's demoralizing for the salesperson. I watch salespeople, like, literally, their whole humanness drops out, right? There's this energy drop. They're not in the game. They're frustrated.
Absolutely. And there's no control, right? A little equation as a sidebar. If anyone suffers from time management challenges, this is a good equation to be thinking about. So the strength of your upfront contract divided by your need for approval is equal to time management, right?
That's right.
And this is how it goes. And you can think about where that fits in there. Maybe as an example, let's say you've got a seller who, sets a week upfront contract. And so they agree to 30 minutes to an hour, right? So it's not 30 minutes. It's not an hour. They say 30 minutes to an hour. And as the conversation's progressing, they let it kind of wander a little bit. And as they get to the hour mark, they still let it wander a little bit further. And now it's at an hour and 15, right? And so their need for approval has kept them from keeping it on track. The strength of their upfront contract was weak to begin with, and now their time management is suffering. And so they lose 15 minutes there. Well, they do that 3 or 4 times in a day. They've lost an hour, and now they're rushing around. They're trying to catch up on stuff. I mean, that's pressure. That's stress for everybody, right? So if you break that down, you're saying, okay, so what's the science behind that? The science is just these 5 critical elements. One of them is agreeing to a length of time. We talked before about not getting clarity on that. And if we don't agree to a length of time the seller needs to really have the conversation they need to have, typically the seller does not get enough time, right? So if they want an hour, but they don't ask for an hour, they might only get 30 minutes. And then they're rushing through it, right? And it's not good for either party. So you want to make sure that whatever time you need for those conversations, you're very clear about it. And if you need to finish early, or you're going to finish early because you might feel like you're asking for some more time than you might anticipate getting. Let them know that. The best thing a good salesperson can do is give time back to a prospect for the course of their day. That's like gold, right?
I mean, and I oftentimes at that point when I ask for the hour,
Yeah.
right, I try to give them a couple of guarantees. Like, hey, look, hey, I'm not going to waste your time.
Yep.
Right. And if we get to a point where you feel like this isn't going to fit, hey, absolutely tell me that. But I also try to promise them that I'm going to give them a couple things. Right.
Yep.
And the time they spent with me is no matter what's going to be valuable. Like, here, we're going to show you how we do it for the biggest companies in the world. Right here, even if you don't use us as a brand or to manage your process or your construction, or that's ultimately what we're selling is managing your construction. I'm going to show them how we do the biggest brands. And there's some commitment in that conversation that there's some value to them, even if we don't do business together.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so that'll lead into not the next step, but that's the step after. So it's time first, right? We want to make sure we've got time agreed to.
Yeah.
Then we want to make sure you've just got a general sense of purpose for the meeting. Like, what is
That's
the
right.
purpose of having the meeting? Sometimes that might feel obvious to the seller, but it's not something both parties agree to because they haven't said it out loud, right?
Yep.
So I want to just make sure we've established a purpose for the meeting. And then we get into the comment you just made. What's their agenda? What do they want to get out of it? So for that hour, it's a good use of their time. So at a minimum, you can add value. Even if you don't work together, you've at least helped add value based on, adhering to their agenda and some of the things they want to learn, right?
I always feel like that's what I want to do. I want to give them a gift. Thank you for your time. And here's what I'm going to give you for our time, right? I'll show you some of the systems that we use to operate this. We'll show you some of the processes that we do. And maybe that works for you. Maybe it doesn't work for you, but at least you'll see how we do it for some of the largest brands in the world.
Yeah. And so we want to understand what's their agenda so that, it's something we can add value to. And then on the seller's side, there are questions that every seller knows they want to get insight into or they need to. And if they don't prepare a prospect for that conversation, they might catch them off guard. So I think, there's a rule or a Sandler rule. If there's a bomb lying around, light the fuse. If you want to deal with your biggest fears, deal with them up front, right? So share them as part of your agenda. Here are some of the things I'd like to ask you about. Here are some of the things I'd like to talk to you about. Are you comfortable with that, right? And so on the seller's side, it's their agenda. So it's time, purpose, prospect's agenda, then seller's agenda. Order matters there too. Start with their agenda and then add yours on top of it. And then the last one is outcomes. And that's probably the most unnatural part of that conversation, right? It's just predetermined outcomes. And so there's three of them in there, and the one we just demonstrated. One of them was, I think this is an important thing to think about. It's the seller's bill of rights, we call it. Sellers have rights in the conversation, right? You don't have to work with someone just because you met with them and just because they might be able to buy from you. If it's not a fit, you should be able to walk from it, right?
That's right.
So, that's the no from the seller back to the prospect. And it's a disarmingly honest part of the conversation. If I can't help, would it be okay if I let you know? I don't want to try to, cram a square peg in a round hole. If it's obvious to me I can't help, I'm not the right resource, can I let you know? And your response was what we always get. We call it a universal yes question. It's some version of sure, right? That's refreshing. I'd love to hear that, right?
And ultimately, I believe that this is the real test of a real salesperson, is that knowing where to say no, that you're not out, you cannot serve everybody, that you'll waste your time with the people that don't fit your company's objectives. And by the way, Eric, I've done this, right? I'm 26 years in business. I have tried to serve everybody thinking, oh my God, that's a piece of business I want. I want every piece of business. And that becomes where the brain damage kicks in. Is I think at times giving me a little bit of 2020 vision where I can look back and go, some of the no's I've given have been the best I've done, right? Those people don't fit our company. They don't fit our profile. They don't fit the way that we work. And that takes a little bit of a senior appetite or senior vision to see that way of being.
Absolutely. And, it's a little crass maybe, but as a mindset, we've got a policy. It's the no assholes policy. There's an endless supply of potential clients to work with, right? Let your competition deal with the ones that, are jerks, right?
That's right.
It can be their problem. So it's no from the seller to the prospect. That's honest. But then it's just as honest to give the microphone back and say, hey, look, would you share the same courtesy with me? Right? If something I'm talking about doesn't land for you and you want to tell me no, that's okay. Tell me, right? We'll shake hands, apart ways as friends. And so you want to give them permission to comfortably be able to just tell you no. If we don't, often they feel a little pressure around being able to do that. And so they'll give that wishy-washy, spectrum of equivocation stuff where they lie about their intentions and they want to say no. So give them permission to do it. right? And I think it's one of the scary parts too with it, Anthony. I know teaching this often, I'll get that feedback, and people are worried. They say, "Well, Erik, if you tell them it's okay to say no, aren't they going to do that?" And it's like, well, no, they're not. Right? They'll do it if they want to, and that's good. You want to hear that stuff, but it's not going to make them say no. In fact, if they're on the fence, it takes enough pressure off, or they're less likely to do that because they feel comfortable now. Right?
That's right. If they were going to say no, right, and they get scared or they use that as an out,
Yep.
it's going to happen later on anyways.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. So we just, when do you want to find out? Right? When do you want to KNOW the NO? Right? So we want to do that early. And then the last part is yes, right? So whatever yes is going to look like, it's closing in the beginning so that all you have to do is confirm at the end. So if all you want to do at the end of that meeting is schedule another one, prepare them that that's going to be the ask. If the ask is going to be, we're going to sign contracts because it's at that stage, prepare them that that's going to be the ask. And if you close in the beginning of the conversation, then all you have to do at the end is fulfill the obligations of the conversation, confirm what the right answer is, and move on. So all that pressure of closing, and is it the right time, and is it the right place for it, and do I feel like I'm ready for it, all that gets eliminated. All you have to do is follow your upfront contract. And if we haven't said no to each other, what have we already said to each other? Well, we said yes.
Yes, right. And that's the beauty of it, is that you set this agreement up front, right? You didn't rush off the call. You didn't, the most natural interaction for salespeople and the buyer are just get out of it. Everybody's uncomfortable,
Yep.
right? The seller is scared that they want to get off before someone says no, right? Yep. Hey, I got it. Is it all right if I call you next week? Yeah, yes, call me next week. There wasn't an agreement or any of this stuff in it, but they didn't get a no, right? So that's the scary part, right? Is if I get a no, you can't call me next week, right? Then that's, everything shuts down. It's an opportunity. I don't want to lose it.
Right? Yeah, so, it's a movie with Jim Carrey. I always forget the name of it, but it's, so you're saying there's a chance, right? Whatever movie that was, Anthony, you remember?
Right. You're right. You're exactly right. So you're saying there's a chance. That's exactly right. Now, yeah. I've got this false agreement, right? Because the buyer just wanted to get off the phone. Yep. Right. Both of us were nervous, and we didn't articulate what we're going to do the next call. So, go back through the 5 points of sales contract. Let's kind of go back through that so that the audience can really see that again.
Yep. So again, we want time. So length of time mutually agreed to, and dates, right? So we've got dates and times there. We've got a statement of purpose, right? And that can just be a short one. It's a sentence or so, just a purpose to make sure we're both on the same page. Asking and understanding what's their agenda, so that through the length of time for the meeting, they've got an agenda that you're touching base with, right? You're being good to your agenda, so you don't catch them off guard. And then the last one is outcomes. And outcomes should cover at least what no look like to both parties, and then what yes is as an alternative.
Awesome. Now, yep. Let me ask you this: when you're training this to somebody, do you ask them to put that on their screen or put that next to their phone to try to go down that? I mean, what's the prompts we have to remember to do that? Because oftentimes you're in the middle of that call. I call it the heat of battle, because it feels a little bit. You're nervous. It's remember how it was when you walked across a bar? Right? Oh yeah. You walk across the bar and say, "Hey, I just want to buy you." Right? Your blood's pumping, your brain's going, right? Everything's going in the middle of that call. Right now, you need something to just take a breath and remember to go through the prompt.
Yeah, you got to be ready for it. And, Sandler is not a scripted process because in the conversation, you've got humans doing human stuff. Like, you cannot script that completely. But I always like to think back when I played competitive hockey, we would do these drills. We called them the orange cone drills, right? Yep. My coach would put a bunch of, orange cones on the ice, and we'd go in patterned circles, right? And never once in a game, Anthony, did that drill unfold the way we practiced it, right? Like, never once. But it was designed to make sure that while I was playing in a game, I wasn't looking at my feet. I had my head up. I was ready. My feet were doing what the feet were supposed to be doing because it had been prepared for that interaction. So if you want to really get good at upfront contracts, what we want to teach people to do is, in the beginning, script it out, write it like you would read it. So you've given some forethought to it. You've practiced it. Again, you mentioned role play before. Grab someone and practice it with them in role play, because in the heat of the moment, it's way more natural to just say, "Hey, Anthony, would you like to talk again?" Anthony says, "Sure." Maybe I pick a date and time, but that's about all you get naturally out of an upfront contract, unless you have prepared it, you got it there for reference, and you've got something at least that you can look at in the moment until it becomes second nature.
That's right.
Yeah. So always practicing. And that's fair, I think, for every part of the sales process, just like any professional. There's an amateur selling that people can get away with. There's a professional selling. That's the biggest difference, I think, between people who overperform and people who underperform. And the pros train, right? So they know
train. And that's,
Yep.
again, this isn't natural, right? We're not, there's, you can take some from our natural behaviors on how to do sales work, but really it's a science to it, right?
Yep.
So let's go back. There's a couple places where we use upfront contracts. Let's talk about where the just a couple spots are in the sales process to use the upfront contract.
Yeah. So, in opening that phone call, right? If that's first step is just to have a brief phone call with a potential client, you want to lay out an upfront contract. We call it a mini upfront contract there. I just wanted to make sure we've got about 10, 15 minutes maybe for the conversation today. I want to see if there's something we might want to talk about. And if that's the case, we'll wrap the conversation down by agreeing on some next steps. And I'll lay that out when we get to that point. That's kind of like a mini upfront contract, right? Just kind of opens the conversation. The real meat of the upfront contracts begin at the end of that phone call. That's where you really get into those 5 elements. And then from there, each meeting you have after should include some version of a full upfront contract as you progress through the conversation. So, from that point forward, it's the 5 elements. If we don't have the 5 elements, something's missing. That sales cycle is longer than it needs to be.
Awesome.
Yep.
I think this, Erik, as always, you breaking down the science of amazing sales calls is, what we all need, right? If you're in a sales, if you have a sales or if you have an organization and you're not realizing that you're always selling and you have a sale, there's some sales cycle to what you do, no matter what you're doing. I don't care if you're an internet company or you're selling widgets. Your company's always selling something.
Yep.
And finding the way to have a great sales process and sales training, finding a coach like Sandler and Erik's team, Erik, it's amazing, right? Being able to have that. My recommendation to everybody that's out there, that if you have a sales team and you want to be the most elite at it, find great coaching, right? Find a group like Sandler's that can come in there and do help you and your salespeople really generate ideas and find the science of sales as much as the art of sales. Both are important, and without having some outside look at it, my judgment is our brains make up that we got this, I got this, and you don't see your own character defects in the process, right? The stuff that we talk ourselves into. I know what I'm doing. Look, it's most of the time I believe it's nonsense. Being able to be vulnerable, bringing a coach to really bring us to that next level is the gift of having a group like yourself, Erik. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Anthony.
Everybody, if Erik, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best place for them to catch up with you?
Definitely give us a call, 248-688-9805, or visit our website, www.eam.sandler.com.
Erik, as always, we got more parts of this sales cycle. Audience, keep listening. We will continue to put these out every week, and please enjoy it. As always, if you like the show, take a second right now and like and subscribe. It means the world to me and to Erik and to the whole team in the back, to Connor and Joe and Van and all the guys in the background that put the show together for us. They work hard for you to find great guests like Erik and the Sandler team. If you could take a second and do that now. Put any comments down below. Anything you saw or heard about this or questions you have about it, put it down there. I promise that we'll answer all of your questions. And as always, we're grateful for you listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony.